I think we're going to get going, so if everybody could take a seat. I want to welcome you to the launch of the 2015-2016 State of the Future Report. I think this is, the 5th year we've done this every fall here at the Wilson Center. It's always a great pleasure to do this. And I'm joined by Jerry Glenn, who's been working on this for a few decades now, actually. And he's the co-founder and director of the Millennium Project. And then Clem Bezold, who's now a senior futurist at the Institute for Alternative Futures. I thought I'd just give you a little background about why I've always been attracted to do this. When I was at EPA in the early 90s, I ran a future studies unit. Hard to imagine, but it actually existed for a few years. And Jerry walked in one day, I think, with Ted Gordon, an associate he was working with, and had this idea that we should start a global futures research project of some kind. And I was able to move a little bit of money to them at that time, to the United Nations University, actually. And I went back and actually I pulled the report that they produced for us in 1995, just in the spirit of accountability, and to see kind of what they promised. And keep in mind, at this time, there was no other money for any of this. It was sort of like just, this was kind of the beginning of this. We'd given them a little money. There was no follow-up money. But these were kind of the high-end expected outcomes of the project. By the year 2000, the Millennium Project is expected to have created a reliable system that continuously updates and contributes to global thinking about the future. It makes that thinking available through a variety of media for consideration in public policy, advanced training, and public education. It's a rather ambitious goal. And one of the major outcomes was annual reports on the state of the future that build on past reports. This will serve as vehicles for the accumulation of wisdom about the future by integrating a broad range of work from subjectively normative and quantitatively analytical work. So this was, I think, a fairly broad thing. I think if we look back now, I'm going to make the Guinness Book of Records. I think this is the longest continuous published series of State of the Futures reports that we have, and it's gone on for 2 decades now. Very consistently, I have the entire range of these reports on my bookshelf. So if I look back at what they promised and actually what was delivered, certainly in terms of my EPA investments, one of the best investments I made in terms of long-term impact. So what we're going to do is just have Jerry go through the results of the latest State of the Future report. Clem's going to provide some responses, and then I'll query both of them, and then we'll open it up to all of you. So Jerry?
Thank you. If I say something that's not clear, or you want clarification, or a quote on the stock market, let me know. You can just raise your hand at any time, okay? During the feasibility study that they referred to, one of the ideas that came up is that we asked futurists around the world, if you want to do a world think tank, what would it look like, and so forth. And so we had futurists around the world responding to that. And futurist in Moscow said, look, if this happens, I want to be your Moscow person. Somebody in China says, well, if you want to, so this idea of a node evolved during the feasibility study. Now, when I say node, I mean it's like the intersection of 2 or more networks. All right? So when we do a node, it's like some from government, some from business, some from universities, some from NGOs, some from UN or international organizations, and maybe some just because they ought to be there. So we have 56 of these nodes around the world, groups of institutions and individuals, who then we send out questions to, say, who knows the most about energy or whatever. So the business community picks on a first-name basis those people who know the most about energy. And the universities, of course, will pick those people in the university system and so forth. So this is, in a sense, a global collection of judgment of thought leaders around the world on an ongoing basis. Then we also have an annual meeting of these node chairs and our sponsors, and we all discuss, do a little Delphi, what ought to be the priorities. So last year's priority was the future of work and technology interdynamics. So we're doing that, and I'll report on that a little bit later. So this is sort of how, when we use the word global participatory think tank, that's what we mean by global participatory. We have nodes in Iran, is the National Security Agency listening, and in Israel. We have no cash transaction across the border because of the current rules of the game. but we are allowed to have communications and so forth. And they translate the state of the future for the last 18 years in Iran. They keep the money there. So I'm doing everything legally here. But I just say this to let you know the think tank is not on behalf of the United States. It's not on behalf of a particular ideology, and it's not on behalf of a particular issue. The idea is, how's the whole game going? Because all futurists, as long as I can remember, we all say, well, how's the whole game going? Trouble is, they say, yeah, but we want you to do the future of toothpaste, or we want you to do the future of eyeglasses. You know, we don't pay you for the whole thing, even though we really know, we want to know about the whole thing. Now, some governments will do that, but they do it on behalf of their country, as they're supposed to. So anyway, that's the background of why we have these 15 nodes. The nodes now are coalescing into regional systems. We've got a regional network going, and they're doing their own work, you know, self-organizing, and the same with Latin America. So that's what the state of the future looks like. I'll do the commercial and get it over with really fast. There's a one of those little squares things, you know, you put in the iPad. So you can slip your credit card through there, you can walk away with the state of the future. If you don't want to do that way, you can also do a download later on as well. End of the commercial. And the last part of the commercial is, you'll notice I say on here, greatest number of future relevant facts, information, intelligence ever assembled in one report. If that's not true, I want to know. And if we're second, okay. If we're third, okay. But I don't know of anything, because we read others' reports. Like we read the World Bank's annual report, we read the IMF's, we read, you know, everybody else's. And they're doing it from their own perspective, which they're supposed to do. But as far as an overview of the whole game, I don't know where else you go to it. Okay, we also produced, and for those that do futures research here, if you don't have this, you really ought to. This is the largest collection of futures methodologies, peer-reviewed, ever in one source. Each one gets an introduction on how it was invented, how you do it, what it is, strengths and weaknesses, relations with other methods, and speculation about the future of that method. And then it's peer-reviewed. It's about 1,300 pages. Use it as a resource. You don't read through the whole thing. It'll cause brain damage. But this is 3.0. Just to give you an idea about diversity of our background, of course, Dave just told you the first money that came into UNU was for this project. The first stuff came in there. But then the money for this methodology, the first one was from UNDP. That was phase 2. The project was version 1.0. Version 2.0 was paid for by the US Army. Version 3.0 was paid for by the Rockefeller Foundation. Now that's a pretty diverse set of stuff, but that's the diversity we're looking for, because we all know the world's getting more complex and interdependent. We all know that we're all rubbing elbows more than we ever did before, so we've really got to start to act this way and grow up as a human species and stop this idea, well, if you're A, I'm not in favor of you because I'm the B group. We've got to get over that stuff. Anyway, then we put all this stuff together into a collective intelligence system. And now 2 years ago, or 2 reports ago, I said here, I hoped this was going to be the last state of the future I write. I get overruled quite regularly in the system because I thought, look, the collective intelligence system is way superior to a book, because you've got updates on the news, on the scanning systems, computer models, you know, web resources, real-time editing, et cetera, and everything else. All the methods are in there and everything. But no, I got overruled, so I did another one last year and then got overruled again this year. So I don't know, this may be the last one. Again, I don't know if it's the last one, but I'll go on the record again saying it may be the last one. So if it is, there he goes. But in perpetuity, we'll have an ongoing collective intelligence system if that's the case. I honestly believe the collective intelligence will be one of the next big things. And just like email was not understood in the early days, my first email was 1973. That I had to listen to people for 15 or more years say, you're a nice young man, but we have a fax machine. We don't need this computer communication. That sounds funny today. 15 years from now, the idea is that, well, I have internet with Google and Wikipedia. What do I need a collective intelligence system for? Right? 15 years from now, you'll chuckle at that. Right now, it's not understood. Collective intelligence, all of the elements of a collective intelligence system, software, human brains, equipment, information, et cetera, exist. That's true. But it's just like an opera. Trumpets existed before opera was invented. Violins existed before opera was invented. Voice was before, but it's opera that pulled it together into a different experience. That's what a collective intelligence is a different kind of experience. End of that commercial. Okay, the world is improving better than most pessimists know. People are becoming healthier, wealthier, better educated, more peaceful, and increasingly connected, and they're living longer. Child mortality dropped 50% since 1990. Half the world was extreme poverty, $1.25, well then $1 a day, but with a little inflation, $1.25 a day, in 1981. Now it's only 17%. It's probably lower than 15% right now as we speak. I mean, people kept saying, you can't get rid of poverty. I worked in third world development for several years overseas, and so, you know, this is nice, you know, keep them busy and so forth, but it's not really going to change much. It is changing. Now you know that the UN is now adopting this goal of getting rid of 1.25 poverty per day in 15 years. So maybe the Bible may not be right, the poor, you know, we may get over this. And I've been involved in futures research for 40 years, and I have seen the drop in poverty continually do better than people expected it to do, consistently. Now, we also have the reverse trend on the environment. People think we're going to do better in the environment. When we do, we actually get worse in the environment every time. So we are improving as a human, but we are doing it at the expense of the environment to a large degree. 40% of humanity is connected to internet. I remember in the early days, 1980s, hooking up some dictatorships into this sort of stuff. People said, especially in France, that this is an American hegemony. You may remember this. They thought this was a conspiracy in the United States to take over the world. And the French had that. Anybody from France here? Yeah, but they'll be on the videotape. I'll get an email later. Okay. But it's also at Paris UNESCO where I heard somebody eventually say, we have to think of English as an internet language, just like we learn the different Fortrans and so forth. That was at UNESCO Paris, and that helped to change around. But now, what's the most common user on the internet?
Chinese.
That's right. They've left us in the dust. Okay, life expectancy has increased 10 years over 20 years. We're now 70.5 years today. That includes averaging in the Congo. This is the world average. It's not US average, it's not OECD average, it's the world average. 70.5. When you were born, would you have believed the world average at 70? That's an extraordinary change. The number of international wars continue to fall. Yes, the internal ones are going up. But the UN was not organized to handle internal ones. It was organized to handle nation-state wars. Now, not that it's caused all of the peace, because other people have worked on it too, but nevertheless, we had procedures to deal with these things. We don't have procedures. Look at Syria. You know, we've got to develop. This is one of the things we've got to do. Okay, the future dangers are worse than most optimists indicate. So as usual, both extremes are not to be, you know. Right. However, it was the futurist Robert Theobald who said, if you want to know where you're wrong, talk to the biggest pessimist. That's important. So you don't try to necessarily change the pessimist, but at least listen to them about what's wrong. Same on the optimist. The optimist may not know what's wrong, but at least they'll know what's right. So you got to listen to both of them. Advanced technologies could lead to global long-term structural unemployment. And that's the study I want to talk a little about in a bit. Single individual could one day make and deploy a weapon of mass destruction. So we're talking about lone wolves today with guns. Imagine lone wolves with AI and artificial biology production labs. You know, when you were a kid, you had your chemistry set. Louis Pasteur didn't have, you know, he was a hotshot. You know, the average person in France didn't have a chemistry set. Now, high school kids have chemistry sets. In the future, high school kids may very well have synthetic biology kits. Artificial general intelligence could evolve beyond control. That's been a big topic around the world right now. Proliferation of advanced destructive weapons among hate groups could lead to continuous chaos. It is the old asymmetrical business in steroids. Long-term effects of global warming could produce massive and continual social violence. Organized crime lead to world Central America-like conditions, making democracy an illusion. Some of you may know that organized crime takes per year twice the money that all the military budgets take per year. Military budgets are something like altogether about 1.5 or so trillion. Organized crime, we figure, is in excess of 3 trillion. All right? Think of the military capabilities of the world. Double that in a cash flexibility, because they got more flexibility. Militaries have a hard time. They can still have Congress to deal with things like that. Urban infrastructure may become too complex to manage, maintain, and prevent sabotage. You know, a lot of science fiction stories. Look at Blade Runner and all these other things. You know, imagine running such cities. They're incredibly complex coming up. Uncontrollable nanotech extraction from taking carbon out of the air could eventually make the gray goo. We did a study for the Energy Agency, Department of Energy 10 years ago or so, and part of it was we interviewed all the national lab heads. And that was one of the questions. And everybody said, well, that's not going to happen. No, 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 no. Though how that was going to be prevented was sort of ambiguous. So I don't think we're out of the woods of this yet. I don't think we should panic, but I don't think we're out of the woods yet. Large enough asteroid could hit the Earth and cause nuclear winter. Nanotech warfare may grow beyond human control. Imagine an individual or a small country making nanotech robots, manufacturing mass stuff. That changes your normal sense of military power. Doomsday scenarios of nuclear proliferation are possible and not over yet. Hence the conversation in the Middle East as we speak. The Earth's magnetic poles could weaken, no longer protecting life from solar radiation. One estimate is 500 years. I want to pause on this for a second. There's only one study on this that I know of. And I have talked with some folks at NASA about this. The poles always lose their magnetic strength before they shift. That's normal. But then, but somebody hadn't gone through the whole thing to see over a period of time what's happening. We know in physics, entropy happens, things do run down. So it does make sense that the magnetic poles will slowly but surely lose their strength. At what point have they lost their strength enough that the solar radiation is creating cancer regularly on the planet? This, to me, is one of the most important, strong arguments for why we should take the space program to get out of the solar system sooner or later. Now, if it's going to take us 500 years to figure it out, well, that's our deadline. Now, there's only one study. We've got to do more of that. So maybe it's 1,000 years. We don't know. But in any case, if we think we're going to have indefinite life on Earth, we're not looking at the situation clearly. Okay, some of us, you may know that we do a State of the Future Index every year since 1999 or 2000. The idea is futures are always asked, is the future getting better or worse? And the answer, of course, is, well, it depends. And then the next question is, well, it depends on what? All right, well, how do you measure what? And how many whats do you put in relationship to each other? So these are our whats over here. We assess 15 global challenges, and we asked people around the world, if you're going to measure progress or regress, what would you measure? Then we had to get data on that to see what's reliable, because data, as you know, is not always reliable. We ended up with something like 119 or 120 indicators. Of those, on the first go-around, we could only use 19. Tells you how great data is in the world. We're now up to this, 28, so it's improving. But the idea is you take 20 years of data, project it out 10 for each one. Right? That gives you a number. But then you then send out a questionnaire around the world and say, okay, what's the best possible for this variable? And what's the worst possible for this variable? Then you average both those together, so worst becomes 0 and best becomes 1. Then you project through it, and it's like 0.2 to the good or 0.8 to the good. So then you can add, so this is a way that you can compare apples with oranges, because what you're comparing is to the good. You want all these things to the good. Right? So how much to the good each one, and you add that together, and that's how we get the index. But then where the gold comes in is you can hold all the variables the same and say one of those gets to the best. How much does it affect the overall index? So you can do what we call a sensitivity analysis, and you can say here are the 4, 5, or 6 things that are the most important to invest in to get the overall index up. Because the object is to improve the whole future, not just education, or not just economy, or not just security, but all together, the whole thing. So we end up with a report card, and we did it graphically different this year. We try to learn from feedback. People complain and said it's too complex or other way. So I don't know, this may be too complex too, but the idea here is the first block on the left-hand side of each tells you what the value was for that indicator 20 years ago. Then the next one tells you what it was 10 years after that. And then the third one tells you what it is right now. And then the last one tells you what the projection is in 10 years from now. So it gives you essentially a 30-year spread there on each of those indicators. So you get a sense of the trends in each of these things. So this is where we're winning. I won't read through the whole thing. You can see it if you buy the book on the outside. And this is where we're losing. But as a gross generalization, we're winning in most of the human welfare areas, education, health, things like that. Most of the health, most of the welfare we're winning in. Mostly where we're losing is environment, violence, and organized crime, and internal conflicts areas. Some of you have seen this before, so I won't go through the whole thing, but these are 15 global challenges. The way that these were determined, it was we said, sent out a questionnaire to everybody, picked by the nodes around the world. In 25 years, what's coming up that's going to be a big deal that's either misunderstood or not understood? So, and then we said, now, tell us what you think that's going to look like in 10 years and 25 and give us a reference. So they couldn't just fill out the form and send it in. They had to do a little bit of work for that. So out of that came a whole bunch of stuff. We went through a series of processes I won't bore you with, and then that ended up with 15 global challenges. Well, actually, the first year was 15 global issues. And then our planning committee said, look, you looked at it like engineers. My partner in crime is Ted Gordon. He was the engineers chief for Douglas on the third stage of the Apollo rocket. So we have a strong engineering influence here, and when someone says it doesn't take rocket scientists, I say, yes, it does, and there he is. So our planning committee said, you approach this like problem-oriented. You also got to look at the other side of the coin. What are the opportunities? So we went the same process. We ended up with 15 global opportunities. And then the third year, we put it together into global 15 challenges. So that was the process that did it. The reason we stuck after the third year and didn't change that much was because the group in Finland said, we're using this framework to evaluate our country. You know, how's Finland doing every year based upon these questions? And if you keep changing the doggone questions, we don't have any longitudinal improvement stuff. So we stuck with it up until last year. We did not have education as one of these challenges because we said education was a strategy on every challenge. But then the advances in brain science and brain chemistry and artificial intelligence was growing so much that just having that as a part of science and technology challenge just was untenable. So we put together, so now there's an education challenge that puts these things together, and we just put together two versions of decision-making into one challenge. So that's the agenda. We think that this is a framework for understanding global change. I mean, it's very, because right now we tend to study global change in terms of the press. Well, according to that, global change is a whole bunch of murders and killings. And if you look at it through just our own blogs, then it's our own ideology telling us what's going on. So the 15 global challenges, as you watch this changing through time, you get a sense of global change in an organized fashion in the feedback system. It's also a system like the human body. One challenge is no more important than another one. I mean, you can say, well, the liver is not as more important or less important than the heart. Well, that sort of doesn't make any sense. This respiratory system is not more important than the circulatory system. Doesn't make any sense. So all of these things are important. So when we have these television interviews and somebody's talking on water and somebody's talking on energy, and the energy guy says, you give me enough energy, I can solve your water problem. So energy is more important. Those arguments are not productive. You know, someone wants to do water, let them do water. We need to understand we've got to do the whole kitchen sink. All of these are important. Okay, now, if Dennis was here, Bushnell from NASA, he has pushed us for a couple of years saying your executive summary is a good overview of the global situation and future prospects, but it's not integrated. You got a paragraph on water, you got a paragraph on demography, you got a paragraph on this and so forth. You know, it's the old stovepipes, isn't it? Can't you do an integrated system? So this was our first attempt, and we'll take feedback from everybody. The idea is you have to have it simple enough that people understand, but sophisticated enough that it's actually saying something useful. So that's our first hit at it. We'll see what people think about it. The idea is that these are key strategies, the blues are the key strategies that are high-impact strategies. In other words, we got a lot of strategies in the report, but some strategies affect more of the challenges than others. So these are the ones that affect more of the others. And then what are the various challenges and issues that around them that they actually address? You'll notice seawater agriculture on the top there. This is what solves the #1 problem of agriculture, which you don't have to worry about rain. If we had enough seawater agriculture along the coast of Alaska and California and Florida and other places along the way, we wouldn't have to worry much of the agricultural impact of California, but we haven't done that. It also turns brown areas into green, so it's good for cap and trade in the environmental sort of situation. In many parts of the world, the best places to do this is very poor areas, so it becomes an economic development strategy as well. Each of these things, if taken seriously, could make quite a difference in our judgment. Inevitability of new economics. concentration of wealth is increasing, and I see nothing that's stopping it. Speeches, yes. Books, yes. But I don't see any actions that are actually going to stop it. Income gaps are widening. Same comment about that. Employment less economic growth seems to be the new normal. Return on investment in capital and technology is usually better than labor. So you got all this investment money around the world is not going to labor so much. Well, what happens if that's the case? The number of persons per services or per products is falling. Taking this together, you got 25 to 50% unemployment as a business as usual forecast by 2050 without new economic approaches. One of those new economic approaches that's now being discussed more seriously than it had in the past was the idea of some form of guaranteed annual income. I was up in New York yesterday with the Croatian delegation because they want to look at some things out of the Basque region. The Basque region has had some sort of a guaranteed income for some years. Basque region is doing much better than the rest of Spain, you'll notice. Now, that may be cultural, it may not be economic policy, but nevertheless, it's to be taken seriously now maybe for the first time. Because if the factors that are changing the employment in the future going as we think they may, then what kind of a world says, well, I'm sorry, you know, you 50% over there, you didn't make the cut, so you're out in the street. You know, they went to school, they paid their taxes, they did everything right, and boom, they're out in the street. But this is not going to happen tomorrow morning. So as honorable futurists, we should think ahead. You know, if honorable futures had existed before the Industrial Revolution, we might have prevented a little bit of pollution. But we didn't have them then. But we have them now, so we got some jobs to do, all right? Okay. So the Millennium Project assessment of what our priority should be said, okay, that should be taken on as priority. So the first thing we did is we did a literature review and research review, and we found that there are some very good studies on artificial intelligence, but they tend, in my judgment, to underrate the application of technology. For example, I made the comment about the email. You know, email was around, took a long time for it to get. You know, the Internet Protocol, when that was done? 1968. And then people say, well, the Internet began in the late 1990s. No. It was around a long time, but you guys weren't using it because you're using fax machines. Anyway, so we found that, and if you want to see a good study on this, it's what's his name, Bosco? Who's the guy up in? Jolson, you mean? No, one up in Oxford. Oh, come on, Bostrom, Nick. Yeah, Nick did a study with a bunch of AI folks around the world and said, okay, what are your estimates? And the estimates was by 2040 to 2050, you got a 50-50 chance of serious artificial intelligence, general artificial intelligence taken on. And by 2075, I think it was a 90% chance. So the thing is that we are staring at a wall in the future that's telling us your normal way of having economy will not be there. So the longer and harder we think about this, together, not just as the United States, but together as a species, the better off we'll be able to go through that wall. Now, the thing was that they are assuming that that's going to make everybody unemployed immediately. But the application is going to go differently. It takes a little while. Then other studies looked at just the normal labor market today and say, okay, how many more bus drivers are you going to have? But in the United States. So there wasn't anything that we could find that says, here's the whole picture, you know? And they didn't take synthetic biology seriously. Synthetic biology, do a Google search on the future of synthetic biology. That's going to have a tremendous impact. I mean, think about how many things that we do that could be replaced by a life form. You know, whether it's a micro life form or a big life form. And then what happens if artificial intelligence starts to write genetic code for new artificial intelligence based upon the response of artificial intelligence and synthetic biology around the world on a moment-by-moment basis? These things are not impossible. They're understandable. Lenz Law 25-6. If it can be understood, it can be digitalized. All right? Eventually. It's just eventually. Just, you know, and the IBM with blue against the chess proved that point. It was a massively complex problem that was done. Anyway, so I'm jumping up and down on top of this because we have not gotten a single person to throw in 1 penny for this study. I talked to ILO. They said, oh, 2019, we're having our big celebration. This will be great for us. Yeah. Want to put in a couple of dollars for the study? No. We'll read your study. U.S. Chamber of Commerce, same. People kept changing their jobs, too. ILO, I mean, not ILO, but the U.S. Department of Labor. The first entity that actually said, we'll put up some money was the Basque region in Spain, these folks I met with. Bizarre, right? Can't get it out of the United States, I can get it out of Basque region. Anyway, so that was done, and so from that literature search, we said, what are the most important questions that don't have answers to? All right? How many questionnaires do you get where you know that everybody knows what the answers are before they do the questionnaire? We tried to come up with some stuff that would actually want to know. So we did a real-time Delphi. The results are in the book. The books are outside the room or downloadable. And then we're going to base the results of that real-time Delphi and generate some scenarios and some roadmaps. That's what we're working on right now. So if any of you, and the video audience as well, if any of you have seen good scenarios about this transition with the future of synthetic biology, artificial intelligence, robotics, drones, nanotechnology, etc., let me know, and especially if they're global. But even if they're local, that's fine. We want to do another literature search on all these sort of things so that we don't write what's already been known. We're trying to get with the unknown stuff. And by the way, a little pause on scenarios. We have over an 850 scenario set bibliography in our collective intelligence system. So it's the largest compendium of, and there's annotated, by the way. It's not just listing scenarios, it's annotating them. Most scenarios that are called scenarios, even including the NIC 2030, are not scenarios. They're discussions of scenarios. Futurists are getting lazy. In the early days, a scenario was a story, not a discussion of a story that connects a future condition with the present with plausible cause and effect links and decisions so you can see it happening. Most of what you read is someone said, well, in this scenario, people thought this. How did they come to that thought? Was there books about it? Were there newspapers about it? What was it? And I think futurists are getting lazy. This is like comparing the text of a play with the playwrights or with the theater critics' newspaper article the next day. Both are good things. I want to discuss scenarios. That's good things, but they're not the same. Why do I stress this? Because one of the values, I worked with Herman Kahn off and on for 10 years, who's invented all this sort of stuff before during the Cold War. And one of the values of doing scenarios is actually the writing of it, so that you get to a point where you say, I don't know. Remember Rumsfeld saying, you can't know what you don't know? Scenarios were created to answer that question about the thermonuclear war. How do you prevent thermonuclear? We didn't know. So write stories and find out what you don't know. Because as you write a story, even if it's like a fiction story, as you write it, you say, it can go this way, it can go that way. Ooh, I don't know. Then you go back and do your homework. And then you can fill in the scenario later. But finding out what you don't know, that you didn't know, that you should know to make sense, that's how you find it out in a scenario. You don't find that out if you discuss a scenario. Because all you're doing is you're repeating your ideological mindsets on what somebody else has said. That's okay, better than nothing, but it's not a scenario. Okay, then we'll send out a real-time Delphi on the scenario drafts, so everybody will have at it and pick at it and so forth, and we'll hopefully improve it. Then we'll take the scenarios, policy implications, and produce an initial report as input to national planning workshops. Chris, are you here? Where'd you go? There you are, yes. All right, we want to work with Chris to do a little workshop, maybe, or initial workshop with Congress, and then see if that'll lead to trying to do a national planning workshop. Because just having a couple of futurists out of the Arley House in Virginia is cool, nice wine and so forth, but it probably won't matter. What we need to do is some sort of a workshop with some politicians, some university, the normal sort of a mix of thing, and be serious, because these things will not happen tomorrow morning. But they will eventually happen in one way or another. So to be responsible adults, we should think it through. But we got to think it through not just with futurists. We got to think it through with politicians as well. Okay. So after all those national planning workshops, what we'll do is we'll send stuff out to the 56 nodes around the world, and they initiate some sort of process. All right. Then if they do that some sort of process, then we take the results of those national studies or workshops. However, they'll all be different, and that's fine. We'll want to take what the key ideas and put them together so that people can then compare and then send it back to all the countries and let them have like a little discussion and see how it goes. So to answer the question, what do we as a species think about this problem, and what do we think are the options to address it? Then the final report for public discussion. So here's a little Delphi we put out there. You'll see we had a lot of futurists. By the way, there's the reason the numbers are higher than the 300 or 400 is because some people put I'm in philosophy and I'm in futures research, which is okay because you want to do that later on for your analysis. But the most common combinations were futurist, engineer, and technologist, which you would sort of suspect on a study like this. These numbers should not be taken too seriously, but the direction should. We gave them the original ILO numbers of unemployment of something like 6 or 7%. We all know that some governments exaggerate how well they're doing. So the ILO numbers may be lower than the real situation. And also, how do you measure the informal economy? It's always a question. Some people in the informal economy are doing serious business. They're seriously employed. They're seriously working, but they're not counted. And some people are sort of like selling sugar cubes out on the street or popsicles and not making much at all. So the numbers on here are not to be taken seriously. What's to be taken seriously is the trend. The trend is going inevitably into structural unemployment. Now, people are talking about, let me see here. Aha, good, there we go. We tend to think about these technological influences on unemployment and the economy and all that sort of stuff as if they were separate things, right? This is a normal sort of a list that you give: artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, drones, quantum computing, nanotechnology, synthetic, and so forth, all right? But that's not what's happening. What's happening is this. It's the integration. The more we integrate, the more we're able to integrate. The more we have interoperable software and CAD/CAM systems, the more we're able to do it. The more we communicate with more people and more market research, the more we're able to do it. So all of the forces for integration are going up. So to forecast a technology, you've really got to forecast a multi-technology rather than itself. Because take a look, is that cell phone, is that a phone or is that a flashlight? Is that an alarm clock? I mean, what the hell is it? Oh, well, it's a phone. No, 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 no. Phone is like one function out of all of that. All right? So think about, in the future, a little more. Let me come back up here. Now, what am I doing here? Where did I lost that one of those guys? Well, you saw the Rubik's Cube there somewhere. Where did that go?
One more.
Aha, thank you very much. Very good. Smart guy. All right, now, so here, imagine that you were going to design a future technology called the sort of the pretend cube here. What would that cube be? In my judgment, in 30 years, that's more likely a question than the questions we're asking today. So when people say, well, all these things, you know, the robotic vehicle will get rid of so many drivers. Okay. In 30 years, we're not just talking about robotic drivers. We're talking about integrations of synthetic biology, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, nanotechnology into new capabilities that don't exist yet. They'll do what? Those things we don't want to do. How many things do we do in life that we don't want to do? A lot. So this frees us up to a self-actualizing economy eventually. I think that's the direction where we're going to. But this is the way we got to start talking about technology more than we have so far. Or we can talk about it in this way as well. Imagine braiding together different technologies. What would those technologies do? And as Jeremy Rifkin came out with a book just recently, I got it, yeah, what's it called?
Zero marginal cost.
Zero marginal cost, yeah. So like, for example, we print a book. Believe it or not, it costs us about $10 to print those things. And if I print more, it still costs me, it goes down a little bit, but not that much. But if you download, it costs me nothing. All right? So what Rifkin points out, and some others have pointed out, is that more and more of what we do today is such that the next unit of production costs very little. Now, so when people talk about guaranteed annual income in the future, the cost of living may not be as high as we think. Education, you know, we had the brightest minds making the best materials available to all people. Medical diagnosis, medical treatments, even robotic surgery, and so on. An awful lot of things that are very expensive can very well be not so expensive in the future. Now, one of the tricks futures have, originally created by my partner in crime, Ted Gordon, and Olaf Helmer, called a cross-impact matrix, impact analysis. I'm using it now in a very loose way, but I think in a very intelligent way, because you make wealth by putting things in new combinations that people want. So how do you find those new combinations? Well, you make a little table. You say, well, like, if nanotechnology is going to increase the way we think it is, how will that change synthetic biology? If artificial intelligence is going to go the way we think it's going, how's that going to change synthetic biology and so forth? And I have a standing offer around the world, so far I've never had to pay on this bet, is that if you do a matrix of what you think are the 5 or 10 most important things about the future, you don't have to use these, you can use something else, and then repeat them across the top, and then cross-impact them, and write down in notes privately, and no one looking over your shoulder, do it privately. I guarantee you, you'll come up with significant insights that you've never had before in your life, and if you don't, I owe you a dinner somewhere in the world. So far, I hadn't paid for the dinner yet. Okay, so artificial intelligence that can autonomously write and improve its code by responding to feedback from sensor networks worldwide, Internet of Things, will accelerate AI's intelligence worldwide, moment by moment. You know, before we talk about transfer of technology and time gaps, what happens if the transfer is between software, not between humans, and it's instantaneous and it's perfectly replicated? That kind of transfer we've never experienced before. So when people say, well, no problem, we'll just have people learn science and mathematics and so forth, and we'll be okay, we'll have employment. Yeah, you think you can learn faster than this? Every day? So when this actually begins to happen, and I put 2050 as a question mark, I mean, these are rough ideas here. When that's going to be much faster than Moore's Law. And everybody knows about Moore's Law as having a big impact. That's going to look like the fax to the email. All right? We don't even have a term for this AI law yet. The trouble is we keep changing what AI is. Anyway, what was asked? How would unemployment go if the socioeconomic political system does not change? How does the unemployment look like? And those are the numbers I just gave you. What are the technological factors we really got to pay attention to on this sort of stuff? What are the questions we should ask even before we answer these questions? You know, a lot of times we don't ask the questions before we ask the questions. Huh? How likely and effective could these actions be in creating? One of the answers were nobody was really happy with any of the answers. It means we don't really know how to address this. Will wealth from artificial intelligence and other advanced technologies continue to accumulate income to the very wealthy? Yeah. However, there are some policies that we can address. We tax a car, you know, a license plate, and you pay so much money for that. But that car does not reproduce itself for another car. So the government doesn't get the second tax. They just get one. But with robotics and artificial intelligence, they're reproducing new stuff all the time. So you can tax A creates B, you can tax B. And it didn't cost you to get to B. The government didn't, because the private sector did that. So in other words, the vacuuming, so to speak, if we're going to have all this wealth like crazy, we can create systems, predictable systems that doesn't stop progress, just like your driver's license and your license plate tax doesn't stop cars, unfortunately. That tremendous growth of wealth could very well be income growth for a guaranteed income. Now, I pause. I have not seen a serious cash flow projection on this question anywhere. I used to know Robert Theobald many years ago, who was one of the proponents of this, Hazel Henderson. There's been a lot of futurists who've talked about this for years. It's not a new idea. But what hasn't been done is give me a cash flow, because I don't want to turn the world into Greece. Forgive me, Greece, but your financial situation is not what we want to have for the whole world. Okay? We don't want to do that. We want to, ahead of time, again, as honorable futures, how do we make this transition in an intelligent way rather than a stupid way? How necessary or important do you believe it will be for guaranteed annual income? The 5 categories of responses, like, you know, very necessary and so forth, I think I have it here later on. The vast majority of people across the world said at some point this is going to be necessary. at some point. Yeah, okay, I'm moving along here. Ta-dum, 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 ta-dum. You can read this later on. By the way, futurists were much more worried about this than anybody else. The highest impact on this sort of stuff without a futurist, so they're on the ball. We may have to train people to sort of see themselves as the center of the world, create their own jobs. The factors that are making these things in the future and the ability for you to do it, the ability for you to become your own global corporation, all are working in your direction. You list all the things that could make you successful. The trends are moving in that direction, so people can do this more. Here's your contemporary office for your world access to whatever it is, and this could be your future one. The idea is you to train your avatar who you are. You get that whole bunch of if-then questions, and you go through it, and every day it's learning you more and more and more and more, until it's learning you so well. I know learning you is not the way you're supposed to put it, but you know. It's learning you so well. Maybe that's going to be learning you. Well, anyway. That you go to sleep. Before you go to sleep, you say, man, I'm curious about this, and go to sleep. Then you wake up in the morning, and your avatar wakes you up and says, by the way, we now have 323 opportunities for you around the world. The average income for each one is about $25 a unit. Okay, well, reorganize these in certain ways and come on, oh, well, and then you end up creating your career every day differently. That's not impossible. We all know about the issues of Facebook and so forth and so forth, but that's the early stuff. What happens if everybody's got an AI avatar that's not only learning from you, but learning your responses that you didn't even know you had the responses around the world to what you're doing, and finding out where you can actually get different activities. Let's say you want to go to the Woodrow Wilson Center for this talk, and you want to go listen to this talk. So you send out your avatar and says, hey, there's 15 people who want to go with you. Can you put on your little glasses so that I can watch this talk live? Because this is not being streamed live. But if somebody had that capability, that could be streamed live, and they could pay their $1 or whatever for that sort of stuff. This kind of thinking is not in our education system in the world. We're keeping the idea that education is to give you knowledge and make you a citizen. It should also be to increase your intelligence, because we know the brain can change, and to create your own future, your own life, your own capabilities, a self-actualizing economy. This cash flow's got to be done. It's not done well yet. So if anybody's got, these are some of the factors that I was looking at. When I say cash flow, in normal business, you got like month, income, and cost. And you project it each month. I want to do this for the world, but every year, going out to 2050. And I want people to argue about this like crazy with different assumptions. So there may be different cash flow projections. But if we don't have that, then in my judgment, the scenarios will not, at least the scenario on this issue, will not be plausible. Because remember, the idea of a scenario is to find out what you don't know. So that's what we're going to be working on. And you can see the rest of these sort of things later on. This is the one about the income up there. You can see most of the people thought that was important. Some generalizations, no actions to address these issues received high consensus, which really means we don't know what we're talking about yet. Or somebody may know, but that hasn't been communicated well. Little understanding of the future synthetic biologies and its impact on work. I mean, this is a big black hole. Most understand the world economic system, social change are going to change. And then that's what's clear, that through all of the people. You can't talk about unemployment in 2050 because the phenomena of employment will be so different, you can't measure it, it's not the same way. So it's clear that people, the thinking leaders around the world, understand that the change is afoot. Where that goes is not clear yet. State of the future. Yeah, okay, that's all I got to say. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jerry. Hey, Clem.
Okay, great, thanks. Thanks. As always, it's Jerry's like drinking from a fire hose, right? And the state of the future is like that as well. It's a really significant document. I should say a little bit of history. I'm Clem Beazle from the Institute for Alternative Futures, and Dave related a study that he was involved with Jerry 20 years ago. Jerry's had a chapter in a book that I did almost 40 years ago. Jerry's chapter was called The Social Technologies of Freedom, in a book titled Anticipatory Democracy, that if you recall, Toffler's prescription at the end of Future Shock was Anticipatory Democracy, and he and I started the Institute with Jim Dader, and that was our first book. Jerry had that in that chapter in it, and he has been evolving the social technologies of freedom since then, and including this, in effect, the Millennium Project, I'd say, represents that. So, and I'd say, so go, Jerry.
See, it's all your fault. You started this asking me to fill a chapter.
I'll make a couple comments about the state of the future and its significance, and then raise some fine points. One, it's overwhelming in the sense of its depth. Two, it captures things which are not on the screen in many cases. Where else would you go typically and find the forecast Jerry just gave us, or the statement that organized crime is $3 trillion, double the spending of militaries around the world at $1.5 trillion? And what do you do about it? I mean, there's so there is significant novelty, might not be the right word, but identifying things which are not so visible. Yeah, I put in that camp the saltwater agriculture, which Jerry's been talking about for a number of these reports, but also the meat without animals as a strategy. And as you may know, that 18, depending on who you look at, 18 to over 50% of greenhouse gas emissions are related to animal agriculture. And the issue is, if we could produce meat, either if we go vegetarian and stop demand, or if we could produce meat without doing that, which his report identifies some of the dimensions for that, that's significant. And so there are, throughout the state of the future, insights and opportunities that I think are significant. And even the patterning of the challenges, I think, is important. Jerry spent a lot of time on the study that's at the end of the future of work, and I was one of the people who took part in that Delphi, and I totally agree on the importance of it. And I agree more or less with the forecast. I think we'll have 10 to 30% unemployment in many of the knowledge sectors in the U.S. by 2030, earlier than that forecast. And it's hard. We've done a lot of work sort of looking at this. And the knowledge sectors are particularly healthcare and education, two big knowledge sectors, where the way work will be done will evolve pretty quickly. There's a lot of issues, and if you know Clayton Christensen's work on disruptive innovations, there's just a lot lurking, waiting there in the technologies that Jerry has identified to happen. There's some structural economic issues about how quickly, and if we had capitated care, or if we have a high percentage of people who are paying their first $5,000 to $10,000 out of pocket, high deductible buyers of healthcare, technologies will increasingly be available to do significant self-care. Doc Watson applied to healthcare, the kind of thing that Jerry's describing, are being developed as we speak. So looking at those larger employment issues is significant. And if you put that together with the technologies he's looking at, and with Jeremy Rifkin's zero marginal cost economy, and the argument that, and economists have long said that things should be priced at their marginal cost. Well, if marginal cost drops to zero, and in many fields that will be the case, unless you have a monopoly power or in some way price thresholds that are supported by the government are allowed, you will have difficulty making money. And we will have self-production, 3D printing, and those things which fuel this zero marginal cost activity, and that we haven't fully sorted out. And I think that one of the things I would encourage, I think you should do another one in 2 years or whatever your timetable is, but add this to that, and that is when you look at the challenges of work, look more at what the self-production, co-production of the stuff is. When those technologies come together, to what end will it be put to people, particularly those who don't have an income from work? I'd also like to praise, if you go back about 8 slides to your cash flow guaranteed income thing, I'd also like to praise the state of the future. We've been looking at this for a while, and this is, I think, a guaranteed income, a basic needs income, a citizen income, or what Richard Nixon called it, a negative income tax, should be put in place. There are huge issues about how we will fund it and how, in parallel to how the economy will work given all these things. But as a matter of course, we will no longer be able to ensure our wealth and well-being, distribute wealth and well-being through jobs in a consistent way. We will just have structural unemployment that is too high for that. And so I think that that's significant. And I think hooray for State of the Future for beginning to look at, well, how would you pay for it? There's some ancillary questions that will say, well, where will the income streams be coming? But we are facing, and I think it's really appropriate for futurists to be looking at this and phrasing this. It raises the questions of, well, what's our meaning? Work gives meaning to many people. Their job defines them. It defines much of them. The issue is, what is our meaning and contribution going forward if we've got, in effect, if we're self and co-producing with our community a lot of our needs, if we've got a citizen's income for purchasing other stuff that we need, what's our purpose, what's our meaning, what's our contribution? Those all need to be evolved as we go forward. But the State of the Future sort of sets that up. And in terms of the integrated global strategy, I also I'd praise that in the sense that the slide that had the circle surrounded by the issues that it would deal with, I encourage you taking a look at that, because in effect those are not strategies that would be at the top of a lot of people's lists, but they're significant. It's significant thinking in terms of what do we do, looking at it. I'd also applaud Jerry for saying, it's good and bad. His slide at the beginning about, we are making progress. There's a lot of human progress. As he says, it's in welfare and human services in many cases, but we're backsliding in a number of others. The environment included, and equity is a piece of that, and that the future of income inequality will only grow. The question is, in terms of equity, in which you don't require income inequality, but you require an adequacy, is significant. And I'd say that that's part of the target in this strategy. So to wrap up these rambling comments, State of the Future is significant. It's a significant foresight effort. As Jerry said, it's focused globally, and that's important because there are few resources that do it with that perspective. It identifies threats and opportunities. It draws them out. It says what should we do. It identifies many of the things that we can do. So congratulations, Jerry.
Thank you.
Okay, I mean, I'm not going to say too much here. I think I'll make one comment, and that's almost every time Jerry's done this, and most of the studies you look at come up with this recommendation, that come up with this challenge, which is how can policymakers become more sensitive to long-term perspectives? If you look at the new report that just came out of Oxford a few months ago on 12 existential risks to humankind, it included things like nano, synthetic biology, asteroid hits, supervolcanoes, nukes, and the other one was just bad governance. So, I mean, as somebody who's struggled for 20 years, and I know there's a lot of you folks in the room that have done the same thing, is trying to figure out how exactly do you get this kind of thinking into bureaucratic systems that tend to be innately incremental, siloed, et cetera. I think that becomes still sort of a lingering and very, very difficult challenge. And maybe the avatars of the future will solve this, but I'm not totally concerned. So if that's going to be the case, but I think that's always worth thinking about that. I mean, the other thing that worries me is just every time we have one of these meetings, we all are getting older. Right?
Speak for yourself.
And maybe we're going to just freeze ourselves. But I worry about the fact that I don't know whether there's a lot of young people replacing us. Even though they may have control of the technology, they may fund the technology.
A lot of them don't call themselves futurists.
Maybe they shouldn't.
Maybe they should, but a lot of them don't. They don't.
So, I mean, that's just an observation on our aging profession here. Anyway, I think we got lots of people in the room. I'm sure people have got a lot of questions. So why don't we open it up? But we are videotaping this, and it'll be archived, and we'll get it to you and on our website. I want to make sure people can raise some questions. So just tell us who you are, where you're from, and let's start doing some Q&As.
Wait for the microphone. Jean Boucher, I'm a sociology PhD student at George Mason University. So Jerome or Jerry, I guess?
Rome for Google and Jerry for the person.
Okay, Jerry, thanks. So you have unemployment going up and you have poverty going down. So maybe you could talk about how you're defining those things differently. And do we see, I guess it's getting to what Clem was saying, I guess we're dealing with political inertia or political ineptness, and do we see some sort of future, I don't know if you want to call it communism, or equalized society where, you know, we develop automation, we develop these technologies, and people don't need to work, right? So we could stay home and garden and walk and have sex or leisure, or, all these things, right? Do we see a space where we, you know, we sort of equalize the benefits of our incredible development, and whatever that equal looks like? I mean, we're still extracting a lot from the environment. So you haven't mentioned you talked about the environment declining, but you haven't talked a whole lot about biophysical limits and energy limits and that kind of thing.
Well, although we try, it's hard to cover the whole future in an hour. Yes, the poverty rate is going down. That's a fact. That's straight measurable. But that was the past. That's a past trend. That's going down like this. But the stuff I'm talking about hasn't hit yet. It's not just you know, yes, there is some impact of employment going on right now with technology, but the big stuff's coming up later. So you got this going down like this, and this other one going up here later. So that's how those two pictures fit together. The business about what people will do, there's a lot of faith in this discussion rather than empirical stuff. There's just not a lot of empirical stuff. We did have the example of the leisurely priestly caste in Egypt. You know, the Western historians say the philosophy came out of Egypt through Diotima to Socrates to Plato to the rest of us. All right? The leisurely priestly caste of Egypt created all this sort of stuff. Now, what happens if by 2050 you have a leisurely priestly caste that are augmented geniuses and are the majority of the world? I augment my brain as I see you right now, right? I'm augmenting it. I don't have 20/20 vision, but now, more or less, I got it. And I'm not embarrassed that I don't have 20/20 vision. We say it's okay. Look at all these glasses around this room. You're a bunch of augmented cyborgs. That's what you guys are. Anyway, what happens if I can augment the rest of my brain and reasoning with all kinds of instantaneous interactive software systems that charge a couple of lights on here or in the environment that I work in? What happens if we can augment intelligence? If so, if I'm taking an IQ test in 2050 and I got interacted with all this sort of capability real fast, why wouldn't I get 150 IQ? Why wouldn't I get them all right? Right? So we may be able to augment human brains in the same way we augment, I mean, eyeballs is attached to the brain after all. If that's the case, and if we can also get education to start to do some of the stuff I talked about before, to get people to say, like, who are you? What do you want to do in life? Between birth and death, what do you want to do? Do you really want to listen to this lousy futurist all day long? No, you want to do something else, right? But we haven't. What we've done is say, you work for a living, you earn a living, and if you don't like it, tough. Do it. And then you can play with leisure later on. What happens if work, play, leisure gets all sloshed together? This is a challenge. This is why one of the reasons I'm doing this. This is not going to happen fast. This is like a generation or two to make this change. But imagine if you actually had a world where much of the world were augmented geniuses, fully integrated at the same time, having those avatars inventing their life every day. Would you simply do nothing? Hard to believe it. Take the younger generation. You talk to them and they're double checking what you're saying on the internet while you're talking. Right? What are they doing? Curiosity, to response to curiosity, the time is shrinking. In the past, you had to go down to the library, take you half a day to get down there, the book may be checked out, you get ticked off, you come back, and you go, I'm going to go. So your curiosity has been negatively reinforced. But now, it's being positively reinforced because I can get an answer to my curiosity really fast, really fast, really fast, really fast. That's a change in culture about thinking. So anyway, I don't want to belabor this point, is that that's one of the reasons we want to write these scenarios, because one of the scenarios that talks about this has to address that question in a plausible way. Why wouldn't everybody become a lazy SOB and the whole place becomes rotten? Why not? So when we write a scenario, we have to show cause and effect links where that's not the case. So that's what we're struggling on right now, is that question.
Bill, let me get you a mic here.
Hi, it's Michael Brody, formerly EPA, currently American U. And my question is kind of stimulated by both the American presidential campaign, which is going on at the same time that at the UN they're discussing, and supposedly we're going to eventually accept the Sustainable Development Goals. So I was wondering in this report whether you kind of looked at sort of politics and political dynamics across the world and what it does or doesn't mean over the longer term to addressing any of these issues. I mean, the contrast between the Republican debate and the whole concept of the future is rather stark. Thanks.
Yeah, we don't do political analysis for a pretty obvious reason. Otherwise, we would be in Israel, or we wouldn't be in Israel, or we would be in Iran, but we wouldn't be in Iran. What we do is we're trying to look at all those things that no matter who the hell you are, upwing, downwing, left wing, right wing, atheist, theist, that's important. Seawater agriculture doesn't have a damn thing to do with the normal sort of stuff. So we avoid that. We don't take any we don't do the political sort of stuff. Now, do we talk about decision making in there and policies? Yes, that's throughout the whole system. But we don't say this party is smarter than that party. Yeah, we don't do that.
Let's see, up in the front here, and then we'll work around. Keep going, up there a little further. There we go.
Yeah, Bill Koglacier at the AAAS. Somewhat related to the last question, the UN now has this process, Sustainable Development Goals to 2030, 17 goals. How should they be, and they actually pay a fair amount of attention to science and technology, how should they reflect the kind of things that in your report, looking at the future analysis, into sort of their roadmap for trying to achieve these goals over the next 15 years?
You know, well, a lot of that sort of stuff has been in the report for a long time already. We didn't put it in this one because it was written before the official stuff with the UN. People have done comparisons between the previous 8 goals, as it was, and the 15 challenges. A challenge is an ongoing thing, so it's not a goal. So there's no conflict. I mean, we refer to them throughout other previous State of the Future reports. For those that are just curious, there was an organization that paid for a special publishing of the 15 global challenges before the 2000 summit. So it was given to all heads of states and all the embassies here. And that was input to that process. The one where they came out with were goal statements rather than challenges, because challenges are vague in that sense. You know, how can the changing status of women affect the human condition? All right, there's goals in there, and we refer to goals that the UN has, but it's just a different thing. It's complementary. It's just a different thing. But I'm sure somebody within now and 6 months will do some sort of a comparison between the two and the relations, and then we'll refer to that in the next report.
Maybe.
Right,
Yeah,
good for you.
right here. Yep.
Good.
Thank you. Elizabeth Merritt, Center for the Future of Museums at the American Alliance of Museums. So I'm wondering, in terms of the methodology of the forecasting, how you balance the diversity of people contributing, because of course I'm worried that what you get just amplifies the assumptions, embedded assumptions and backgrounds of the people who contribute. And a lot of the fields that you mentioned are not notably diverse. Just as an example, when you were looking for a model to look at what might happen in a scenario where we had a wealthy leisured class of people, you went back to ancient Egypt, to the priests, when I'm thinking, heck, just look at women throughout history and in much of the world now, if they belong to a wealthy class, who are effectively structurally unemployed by society. So how do you figure out how you're challenging embedded assumptions that come out of these sectors you're looking for the input from?
Well, Well, one of the reasons for having a global futures intelligence system online is that every piece of information, every subunit, every method, every data section has in the bottom right-hand corner a little icon that you can click on today and make your comment. Then I can go up to the top each day, and as can the other reviewers, 300, 400, 500 reviewers, can click on comments and see your comment. And then others will see that we did or we did not respond to your comment. So it's a transparent sort of a system. So that's one part of the answer. Second part of the answer is when there's differences of opinion, like do we want to have 350 parts per million, or we want to have 450 parts per million for CO2, or do we want to have 500? Well, what we do is we put them right next to each other. Here's some pros and cons, here's some pros and cons. It's not completely coherent in the sense of saying, here are all the answers. So if there's differences of opinions on things, we can put them right next to each other, no problem. That's another reason why we wrote the State of the Future to begin with, is to respond to feedback. NIH will tell you that one of the ways you make your brain smarter is responding to feedback, not just getting it. That makes you dumb. That's information overload. That makes you stupid. You got to respond to the feedback. So one of the, as Dave read out, you know, to do a State of the Future on an ongoing accumulative basis. So the whole purpose, at least from a management point of view, of the State of the Future is to force us to improve each year so that we can take those comments in. So like if you go online, you make that comment, then we got to figure out what do we do about that. And the reviewers can review it as well. And then we also do Delphi studies where you're averaging together, but then you're also putting differences of opinions in there because we take numbers as well as text on the studies.
Okay, you've had your hand up for a while, so we're going to go here, and then we'll shift back over to the other table.
Thank you. I'm Catherine Bosker, a local attorney, and I'm also associated with American University. I have 2 points to make. Number one, on the future of work studies, I think you've left out the most important threshold question, which is, and this goes back to our previous questioner's quote, challenging embedded assumptions. You have to start with square one, which is why do we need jobs at all? Why do we need income? And then when you look back at that, it's only for food and shelter and the basics. You know, I don't think you've addressed enough the embedded assumptions in all of your future work scenarios are that we need jobs and incomes. If you go back to what do we need them for and address that, as our very first questioner said, as long as you're getting your basic needs fulfilled in the future, we don't need jobs and incomes at all. That's my point number one. Point number two is, in any of your thinking, have you addressed the sharing economy? Because when the graduate students that I teach at American University and so forth, they're very much into the sharing economy, and this hooks into my point about why do we need jobs and incomes. When you look back, and it also hooks into a point that our previous questioner, Elizabeth, said. If you go back into history, for example, a small village in Romania in the 1700s, this goes to the sharing economy, there were central bakeries, in effect. Each house did not have its own cook stove. There were central bakeries. When you went to church on Sunday, the housewife would take her flour and her bread and so forth and put it to bake in the village, the central village oven. That, in effect, is the sharing economy. Young people nowadays say, why do I need a car? I can go to the sharing economy and so forth. So how has the concept, which will be even more vast in the future, of the sharing economy, been considered by your folks? So these are two different questions.
Well, first, in that Delphi, as Clem can testify, when you put in an answer, and enter it, the next thing comes up is a space, say, comment or discussion about that answer. That was, I think, over 175 pages worth of stuff to go through. And believe me, sharing economy is often in there. So yes, that's one way we collect that feedback. A second is the third question here says, well, what do we got to know even before you start to answer these questions? And then a lot of that was in there. So that stuff, the analysis and comments about that stuff is in the volume of stuff that we collected. that will be used to write the scenarios. So in the alternatives, by the way, we haven't definitively concluded on what the scenarios will be, the subject, but one may be, we make it. How all kinds of new kinds of innovations, and we'll make it, and things go on, and we won't have the structural change, we'll make it, there will be good policy, boom. Then another one is we're stupid, and we go unemployment and all that sort of stuff. And a third one with the income. Sharing economy will be in all three of those. But how they manifest themselves and how much of an impact is another question. But yeah, that's very much in the thinking, in what the feedback was there. And one of the things I would say that easily half the people said, the nature of work will be so different by 2050, you can't measure it in the same way you've got to measure it. So that's in there.
Yeah, you've been waiting for a while here, so no, I'll shoot back.
Banning Garrett, an independent consultant, and also a faculty of Singularity University. I want to first thank you, Jerry, and all your colleagues for extraordinary work, not just this, but 20 years or so of it, or maybe 40 years of it, and a huge contribution. One of the things that comes to mind as I look at what you're doing, I don't know if this is really incorporated into the process, but it might be valuable, is looking at I would call obstacles and pathways. Because in your scenarios that you do, there's also, it seems to be a kind of a, on the one hand, what might happen, on the other hand, what would we like to happen? We would like to have this work resolved in some very positive way 20 years from now. So part of what I'm always interested in is, okay, what are the obstacles to getting there? I mean, the politics was raised, but it can be raised in a different way. I mean, divisions within countries, I could name one country, sitting in it, where, you know, we can see pathways to solving a lot of our problems. We have a political system that doesn't let us get there. So, but there's bureaucratic, obstacles, there's regulatory obstacles. I don't mean just near term, but longer term. So how do we think about incorporating into the questions that we ask people? Well, what are the obstacles to getting to this place where we're using AI in a constructive manner and actually generating new jobs? The other thing is related to it, what are pathways to get to a better future? I'm working with a friend who's writing a sci-fi book to a positive future, call it some point of a utopia, 100 years from now. Well, my question to him, well, what was the backstory? How did we get there? You know, was it through crises that led us to actually face climate change? How do we think about how we actually get to the scenarios that we want and also avoid, of course, the ones we think are really destructive and dangerous? So I don't know if that's all incorporated in your process. I didn't quite hear it, so it seems like that's part of what we need to do.
If all goes well, and we start with some scenario drafts that then are sent out, some of you may know one of the innovations we did on these things is we left blank spaces in the text. What would make that more plausible? So we get that, but that's from different ideologies, so you get a pattern and stuff. So that pattern can make it, because in that space, you could say, you haven't solved this problem. You got from A to C, but B was going to stop you. All right, so that's one way we collect that. And that's a real answer to your question. But a more interesting answer to your question, though, is we did a study that you can get on the Global Future System, indirectly because of Dave here. He sent us over to the Army Environmental Policy Institute. Kicking and screaming, I wasn't sure I wanted to go there because I have people in other countries who are not too crazy about the U.S. military, and all that sort of problem, but we did. And we did a lot of stuff with them, environmental security, but one thing we did is a study of how do you make futures research and future activity more integrated with the decision-making policy process. And we ended up with a 27-point or 26-point checklist, which of course, like everybody else, I don't follow my own advice. I don't always follow it. But the idea is that and you're keeping my feet to the fire, so I'll try and remember to do this, is saying that each of these things would increase the likelihood of that combination that you're talking about. No one can do all of them. I mean, it's like a checklist, right? And what I got to do is remember to use that checklist. And I was going to publish it in the future. Years ago, never got around to doing it. But thank you for that. But the short
Copy of that, Jerry,
you
if
do?
Yeah, I think
That
so.
Army study? Yeah. We got to maybe update it or just use it. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're getting close to the end, so maybe two more questions, yeah?
Hi, I'm Judy Dreitcore from GAO. Many of the trends and concepts that you mentioned, like collective intelligence, artificial intelligence, and also the technologies, the smartphones, the Internet of Things, many of these have aspects that have been summed up by some people as big data. And one of the main issues that people have talked about with respect to big data, one of the challenges, has to do with privacy, civil liberties, and really cybersecurity. It's because it's not just certain things that are in databases. It's coming to be that everything is in databases. So I wondered what you thought of this aspect. I didn't hear too much about this in your presentation. Thank you.
I wrote a book back in the 70s, I guess it was, or early 80s, called Future Mind. And in that book, I had a sentence somewhere saying, if in the future you have privacy, good luck. I don't expect it. I don't plan on it. I don't think it's likely for me. But I live with it. Now, little parentheses to that. During the Cold War, some of us had our phones monitored by our own country, as well as others. And so I got used to the idea that you wouldn't say something to insult anybody. That doesn't mean that I don't insult people. I do insult people. But by and large, I try not to. Because if various players in the game, pro and con, were listening, I didn't want them to see me as an enemy when I get off an airplane in Cairo. So for many years, I had structured my responses in such a way that I would be in the interest to stay alive. Now, that has a positive impact, I think, of making me maybe a nicer person. Now, I'm probably the only person who's going to say that out loud. Now, on the other hand, if you can do everything you want to keep your privacy, give it a try. But when you list all of the ways to get rid of it or to penetrate it and all the ways to save it, make a list yourself and you'll see not likely. So one of the consequences is you may have to live well so no one can give you a hard time. Now, say, well, what about the medical stuff and all this? Yeah, I understand. But how are you going to prevent it? Now, on cybersecurity, that's a long-term intellectual game. It's an arms race. I don't know if we'll ever get to a point of being secure. So you have to keep at it. It's like physical exercises. You don't do it one day and you're okay. You got to do it all the time. That's a constant struggle, and I wouldn't relax on that issue. That's just the way it is. I just don't see a way around it. And cyber war that's a long conversation, and we're sort of at the end here. We can do another. I wrote about information warfare as distinct from cyber warfare a long time ago, which was information warfare is manipulating the information flow to an opponent so that they make a decision not in their interest. Cyber warfare is different. Cyber warfare is you're attacking software and so forth, and you're taking stuff. That's a different thing. Those are two different things. The information warfare, to me, is actually more important because the fallout of that is a paranoid society. You don't know what the hell to trust. Yeah, okay. He's dying to jump in on this one. Yeah.
Wait a second, we'll get you a mic. Hold on a second.
Okay, you had said these global challenges are important without tiered priority, but I would say energy and the energy transition makes...
What did I tell you? Remember I said that? You give me enough energy, I can solve your water problem? There you go.
No, I'm saying that the energy transition, that we have 10 years to get off fossil fuels without catastrophic climate change. And so where are the scenarios for really calling into accountability this whole fossil fuel sector, which has the capital to make the transition to go into alternative energy, but is doubling down on dirty energy? And
Right.
so...
Yeah, no, there's a lot in the report about that. And if you go online, we even did scenarios on the future of energy, global scenarios on the future of energy, get into this in great detail. There's a lot of stuff in there about that. It's just hard to cover everything. Just your question about the in cyber security, that alone is extremely detailed and complex. It's hard to cover all these things in a short. That's why we put it in the book. Read it.
So we've actually, it's noon, and I want to make sure everybody gets out. We could go on for another 2 hours, I'm sure. I'm not going to make a bet with you, but it'd be an interesting one whether you have a report in a year from now.
I'm betting against the report myself, I hope.
Just to see, but if you do, or even if you don't, you have some avatar that presents, whatever it is. We'll be back next fall.
That would
with-
be good, Avatar, a nice
Yeah.
idea, we'll work on that one.
We'll be back next fall to launch it. So thank you all. The book is outside. We'll just put a big screen up here.